Nice to hear. I hope I don't have to remember people. Anyway. Okay.
Hi guys, we are starting at 12:31. Our apologies. We had a little technical snafu that we have fixed. Thank you for sticking around. I see our room is growing by the minute, so that is fabulous. My name's Beth Spotswood. I am Alta's digital editor. I am delighted that so many of you have come to today's Alta Live. This is actually episode 10, which is a thrill and a surprise. We didn't realize we would be going this long, but here we are, and we're going to keep going. This is the digital version of Alta Asks, which is an author interview series that we do at altaonline.com. Our interviewer is the wonderful Heather Scott Partington. Heather joins us from here in California. She is an author, a teacher, a book critic, and a very regular Alta contributor. She returns this week to speak with author Peter Orner. Peter is here to discuss his book, Maggie Brown and Others, among other exciting things. We've already got some questions. As you watch and you have some questions for Peter or Heather, please ask them in the chat or the question section, and I will make sure that we get to them at the end of the talk, which is going to last about 30 minutes. While you're watching, if you're so inspired and are unfamiliar with Alta, please check out our magazine. We're a quarterly magazine that focuses on California and the West. And membership costs $24 a year. Please consider joining us as a member. And most importantly, right now is a great time to support authors like Peter and independent booksellers. You'll note that there is a link right underneath us. You can buy Maggie Brown and Others from bookshop.org, which supports independent booksellers. With that, I'm going to get lost and turn this over to Heather and Peter.
Thanks, Beth. Hi, Peter.
Hey, Heather. How you doing?
Good. Thanks so much for joining us for Alta Asks Live. First of all, how are you doing? How's life been for you during the pandemic?
Hard to say, day to day, hour by hour, but you know, I'm hanging in there. I have it a lot easier than most people out there, so I'm grateful for that.
Well, I'm thrilled that we're going to get a chance to talk about Maggie Brown and Others, your phenomenal short story collection and novella, and you know, we talked about this a little bit in our written interview, and I wanted to get into it just a little bit more. I feel like when you write your short stories that you're able to really get into characterization in just a short space, just a couple of words. And I was wondering if you could kind of talk about your approach, how you think of crafting a short story, but specifically how you get so much about character without really using a lot of words.
Well, thank you, Heather. And first of all, I want to thank you for doing this. I want to thank Beth, thank Alta. You guys have been great to me. And you know, in these circumstances, it's great for us to connect in this way, and I'm thrilled. You know, I don't ever know what I'm doing, you know, and I always feel a little bit fraudulent to like articulate it after the fact. But you know, I like to do, like I said in the interview, I like to do a lot with a little, or at least I like to try to do a lot with a little. And I think that, I think in terms of characterization, I think that, for example, you know, you think about what a character notices in a room. I'm in my childhood home and I'm looking around at things, you know, that I haven't seen in a long time. You know, I think that you can get a lot about a character simply by thinking about, just for example, what they notice. And that, you know, that thing can lead us to other things, and characters can build from there. But I like to start, you know, small and go from there.
Are there things that the short story form allows you to do that are different than you would do in other genres, or if you're writing a longer work like a novel?
I believe that, and I think also I'm happy to be disagreed with, but to me, the short story form is so wonderfully plastic, elastic, whatever word you want to use. I feel like, to me, anything can be a story. I mean, Chekhov has that famous line, he's like, I could write a story about an ashtray, and he could. And you know, I just feel like I walk around when I'm on, when things are working, I feel like I can write a story about an ashtray. I can write a story about anything. Like stories are constantly coming at me. But you ask how things are going now, and I'm trapped in a house, and that's different. And I don't get the stimuli from walking the streets of the town or city that I would normally do. And so I'm actually thinking more internally, and I'm finding that, stories are coming more from memory and less from external things right now. But I feel like the wonderful thing about it is everything reminds me of a story, or everything reminds me of a possibility of a story, let's say.
Tell me a little bit more about that. So you mentioned in our written interview that you write by hand, you write longhand, and then you type. Are you normally out in the world as you're beginning stories, or are you out in the world observing and then kind of beginning that process at home?
I feel like I'm always procrastinating, and therefore I leave the house when I'm able to. And now I go. I mean, Frank, to be honest, I put my mask on now, and I go to the CVS, and I look at stuff, and I listen to people from a distance, and I'm able to get my stories that way. But I feel like much of my work done is when I'm not working. You know what I mean? When I'm away from the desk, and I always carry a notebook with me, and that usually is what will trigger an idea, and then I will go home and work on it. But I do a great deal of work on my feet. And that might explain sort of, the length of my stories that, A, I write by hand, and B, I'm walking. So I only have so much time and space to be able to create it. So I like to think of what I can do in, a few pages of the notebook, literally.
Are you, so I'm thinking specifically of, your stories are grouped kind of into sections, kind of mini collections within the collection. And there's one section that's called Come Back to California. Do you, as you're thinking of a set of do you think of stories in terms of a set of stories, or are they independent little bursts that are just happening as the ideas come to you? I was curious if you could talk about the inspiration for that set of stories specifically.
I get a real kick out of grouping. I don't know why. I like to have where can I put that? Where can I put that? And that's usually after the fact. I usually have a group of, a bunch of stories that, I have some preoccupations. I'm from Chicago, where I am at the moment. I spent 20 years in California, and now I live in Vermont. I have epicenters of what I think about. And what I realized in terms of the California stories is after I moved from California, very sadly, against my will, partly, not completely, but, I got priced out in some ways. California, I love you, but I realized that I hadn't actually considered myself, I hadn't written about California. I hadn't written any fiction about California until I left. And then these stories started to pile up. And I realized it was, part of it was a pining for the landscape, for the ocean, for the streets of San Francisco and Marin County, where I also lived. So they were grouped. They became organized just because by virtue of geography and preoccupation. And then I come back to California. It's actually a Jack Spicer quote from a poem that I found, and I thought, that's it. That's how I'm gonna organize this. I got a shout out to Bolinas. Yes, I love Bolinas. Who can't not love Bolinas? And everyone's checked for COVID in Bolinas too. Famous. New York Times today. Anyway, yes. I think I just rambled on that answer.
That's
Sorry.
Okay. It's awesome rambling. What do you think makes a short story work? What do you think makes a short story when you read a really good one and you think, oh, that's it, chef's kiss? What makes it successful for you?
That there's blood in it, like that there's life in it. I don't want to be taught anything. I definitely don't want to learn anything. I want to feel something. And that, as everybody here knows, is the hardest thing to do. It's with a flat piece of paper and a few words, you're trying to make someone jolted in their heart. It's not an easy thing. And so, it's, it when you feel it. And that to me is all that matters. And 9 times out of 10, frankly, it doesn't happen, And so it's not as if it's common. I think it's quite rare. You get a very well crafted piece of fiction, but it lacks that, you could finish it and feel like, oh, that was, and I don't want that to happen. I want you to feel it, and like, maybe it won't let go of you for 10 minutes, but I want that 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm. How do you think stories in general are going to be changed by this moment that we're having right now in history?
It's going to take a lot to change the storytelling impulse that has been with us since probably the beginning of us. But, we're living in, this is, and I'm just somebody else saying the obvious thing, but, we're living in something that's utterly unprecedented, and it's going to affect us in ways that I think we have no idea about. Clearly I feel like more internal, I feel closer to the people close to me, all of those things, but I also feel like I realize what I take for granted. I mean, again, this is obvious, but I mean, my lifeblood is listening to people talking on the street and eavesdropping. Like, that's how I make my living, right? So, if people aren't going to chat on the street, if strangers aren't going to collide with each other physically and, psychologically, whatever, you know what I mean? That's going to affect the way that I tell stories and the way I gather stories. And, I think it's going to be hard to keep people apart, but I feel, when you're walking, you're less likely to say hi to somebody now, because you're kind of doing that thing in the supermarket now to just give a little more room. Mm-hmm.
And also we're covered
exactly.
with sort of changes.
Yeah, we all look like bank robbers. So, I don't know. I don't know. I think it's bound, and again, smarter minds than me are going to have to answer that. But to me, in my own little world, it's going to affect the way that way I pick up stories, and that means a lot to me.
Mm-hmm. You're talking a lot about things being more internal, and that reminds me very specifically of the way that you work when you write kind of memoir / criticism. Your thoughts about books and how that blends into writing about your own life. Have you been reading anything recently that you feel like has really affected you or is standing out?
I'm teaching a class at where I work at Dartmouth College, and it's a Ulysses class where we're just reading Ulysses. Maybe some of my students might even be on here, which would be embarrassing. But I'm all about Ulysses all the time, and I sneak other books here and there. I'm reading the great Russian story writer novels. Platonov, who's one of my absolute favorites, very strange 20th century Russian. But Ulysses, and I don't say this because you talk about Ulysses, you immediately sound pretentious. There's nothing really pretentious about the book except for the way a lot of people talk about it. It's a fascinating book to read at this time because it's among the more physically connected. It's there's guys going to the bathroom in the first 30 pages of the book. There's the constant fluid talk, puke, every bodily function, everything that wouldn't sort of, everything now we're like totally freaked out about. It's the most jostling. People are always in each other's faces. There's a moment on the street where Bloom is holding his newspaper and this guy comes up to him and he's like, hey, can I see your paper? And Bloom's like, he doesn't want to talk to this guy. So he's like, take it. And the guy's like, no. I just want to look it over your shoulder. And so he's up on him, like things that today would utterly freak us out. So it's almost an incredible experience to read a book that's so physically connected and maybe one of, among the great city books ever written. So that's what I'm up to right now. Yeah. And my kids are great. My students are fantastic. They're really rolling with it, and we're having a lot of fun.
Who would you say are your influences, or are short story writers that, you know, have been really influential for you?
I have a few, you know, that are really fundamental. Isaac Babel, another Russian fundamental writer. I probably read him once a week. Bernard Malamud, a great Jewish American writer who kind of, sometimes his characters sometimes they fly, sometimes they do weird shit, but mostly it's, you know, really sort of down and dirty realism for the most part. Oh, sorry about the phone. So who knew there was landlines anymore? So Andre Debus was my absolute one of my teachers and an incredible inspiration. Eudora Welty, James Allen McPherson, many others. I could go on and on and on this one.
Do you have something that you'd like to read for us today from Maggie Brown and Others?
Sure. I made a quick decision. Sorry, Gail's leaving a message. This is I'm going to read a story called Pacific that's set in California, and it's in honor of my friend Andre Debus. It's actually after Gail talks a long time. It's still going on. This is a tiny little story called Pacific, and it appeared in California's Ziziva magazine, which I want to give a shout out to that great California magazine as well. So here it is. Gail will stop talking. She's finally done. She sat calm and motionless in the living room while they worked on her husband upstairs. There's something so assuring about these people who tromp into your house out of the night. She'd always been a socialist and saw these men and this one woman who's in charge with their dark blue uniforms and heavy boxes and imperturbable faces as physical proof of the ultimate potential goodness of government. She knew them. It wasn't the first time they'd come, nor was it the second. She sat in the living room amid their work. He was a sculptor, she was a potter. When people asked what the difference was since they both worked with clay, she'd say, "The stuff I make is useful." And this was true. She made bowls, he made heads. Both of them always had day jobs. She'd been a librarian, he an accountant. But the day jobs were a front. On weekends when they were younger, they'd attend craft fairs all over Northern California. Sonoma, Napa, Solano, Contra Costa, San Joaquin. A few times they'd driven up to Humboldt. Once all the way to Oregon. They'd set up a card table and a couple of umbrellas. What better way to see places we wouldn't normally see? That's what she always told the children as she gently set unsold piece after unsold piece back into the trunk of the car for the way home. She'd have to call them in the morning and tell them. Maybe not tomorrow morning, but soon. She sat in the living room, hardly listening to the commotion in the bedroom. She'd heard it all before. What fuss over a failing body, as if it weren't ultimately designed to fall completely apart, to disintegrate. She gazed at their work in the half dark, the work of their hands. The rest of the world, she knew damn well, including their kids, thought them both a bit bonkers. This room, the bedroom, the kitchen, the bathroom, the front stoop, there was never enough room for all of their work, and new pieces crowded out old pieces, heads and bowls. After they were tired, it was as if though they'd been spurred on by a kind of delirious compulsion, not to stave off anything, but simply because they'd had the stamina to go on working. Let it not make sense. The kids, of course, would have to figure out what to do with it all. Luby? It was Lucinda, the chief. Yes, dear? Fred's medications, do you happen to? And she recited them one by one, like a litany, a chant. The past few years, they'd begun to shrink. In town, people said they'd become almost identical. This is often said of the elderly, but even she had to admit that in their case, it was almost uncanny. They'd become dead ringers for each other. Same height, same wobbly gait. Really, from a distance, you couldn't tell one from the other. The dog died, the other dog died. Still, every morning they'd walk across the sewer ponds through the fog, doubled back to Overlook, and wandered up Ocean Parkway to the place where the road crumbled down the bluff. You could stand there 2 hours. You could stand there 5 minutes. The Pacific didn't give a hoot about time. It would eat a year for breakfast. Is that why they'd always been so drawn to it? Is that why still they came and stood at the edge day after day? Its blessed indifference.
I love that so much. That line about the Pacific is just wonderful. And I just, as a Northern Californian, so much of your writing is infused with the spirit of California, and I love that. Can I quote you to you and tell you my other favorite, my favorite thing from the story? I think it's called "Ineffectual Tribute to Len." Is that the correct title?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. About a man who's trying to write about his boss from a summer camp and grappling with the fact that he can't really put a person down on paper. And I just love this line that says, "Horizons can't ever be reached, no matter how many words you lard on in a novel. The attempt at closure is inherently dishonest, but a story, one that ends but doesn't end, that's infinity, immortality right there." And I just love that. I feel like your work, your stories, your endings, all of it, they really stuck with me. So I thank you so much for everything that you've written. It's just wonderful. Can you tell people where they can find? Thank you. Can you tell people where they can find you online and stalk you safely from a distance?
Yes, I'd be honored. I think my handle on Twitter is like social media incompetent, but I'm learning. I'm getting better. I mean, at this point, it's not really, it's not like it's hard. But I obviously have sort of an ambivalent relationship. But I'm out there, and I love to connect with people, and so I'm on Twitter, I think, with just my name, and Facebook with my name, and email with my name, and I have a website too that has my name. So it's all out there. Easy
Perfect.
To find. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
We're going to have Beth come back, and
Great.
She has some questions from the audience. We'll have a chance to answer those.
Awesome, Heather. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was really fun. The quote about the Pacific, I was like scribbling it down too. We'll be. All right, so we've got a ton of questions. I don't know that we will be able to get to them all. You guys, we have such a great crowd, and it's so nice to see so many people who've been coming to Alta Asks Live. I'm seeing a lot of familiar names, so I'm very grateful. Okay, question one, this comes from Jonathan. In Maggie Brown and Others, Peter, you have a few tales with truly disquieting endings. No spoilers, of course, but the endings of The Captain and Montreal would leave any reader shaken. The question is, what is your thought process in making disturbing endings, and how do you resist the urge to make a happy, crowd-pleasing ending?
If this is Jonathan Moss, who I see on the thing, talk about disturbing. I mean, he's a writer as well of disturbing things. So I take it as a compliment. I feel like survival and endurance are happy endings, and so I feel like if that's the criterion for a happy ending, then I think majority of my pieces are happy in the sense that people somehow endure. I think of Faulkner talking about this. He said they endured. It's not. I think that's positive. But give me a happy ending. I tend to run the other way. But doesn't mean it's not impossible. I'm trying. I'll try. Ulysses, by the way, not to give a Ulysses lecture, it ends happy. So there you go. Got a
this
happy
is the
ending.
most I've ever heard about Ulysses.
It has a wonderfully happy ending.
Great. Well, now I feel less intimidated to read it. Okay, this is a question also from Jonathan, part two, and it kind of ties into this. This is for both of you. hopefully it will involve a happy ending. After we come out of this COVID crisis, what would be your advice to the world to help it heal and come together?
Heather?
That's a big ask. I would say there's an opportunity, even though everybody's dealing with some really difficult things right now. And, I am certainly not one of the people dealing with the most difficult things, but I think there's an opportunity to kind of reframe what's the most important, what are our priorities, and to put our energy towards those things. So that would be my answer.
I think it's a great
Peter?
answer, and I'd say vote. How about vote?
Oh, and vote.
And vote. This is a question from Irene. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. What the heck are you doing with time? Is memory really so squirrely? And or is there some other justification for those leaps?
I think memory is that squirrely, isn't it? I mean, even at this, whoever asked you, like, think of like just right now, or like in the last hour, not just since you've been on this call, but in the last hour, how many things have you thought about that aren't necessarily related to what's happening at the moment? And I feel like that's like, it maybe sounds like attention deficit, but it also sounds like life to me. And I feel like memory, especially, it goes beyond the present and allows me as a writer to go so many places. And I'm talking about not my own memory, but the memories of my characters. That gives me a whole nother universe to think about. And I promise not to mention Ulysses again, but it's incredible memory. Well, because what Bloom it's remarkable. I've just been reading all morning. So, but it's incredible what we hold, like entire universes of very personal, very specific memories that you think other people might not be able to relate to, but we can. You can. You may not get this. You may not know what happened, in Cincinnati at that very moment in 2003 when you crossed the street and the guy was there, right, or whatever. But you get the sense that your personal memories are as weird as anybody else's, and so I try to channel through my characters. That's a long answer.
It's good. Unfortunately, we've got time for one more question before we wrap it up. So I'm going to go with David's question. Maggie Brown took me a long time to read, not because it isn't good, it's great, but because so many of the stories affected me in a way that I needed to hold them for a while before reading on. Can you talk a little about this BS notion of stories being slight or somehow less weighty than longer works?
Dave said it all right there. Just Emily Dickinson also told us, right? It's not amount of words. It's not amount of words that determines if something is dense. But we have a size issue in this country. We think size matters. I won't get into how this manifests itself in other ways, but you know what I mean? Like size is the thing. And I look to other cultures where people don't have that obsession, and there are many. I read a lot in translation. Italians don't worry if something's a novel or whether it's a story collection or what it is. What's Invisible Cities? No, but if Invisible Cities was published here originally, Italo Calvino's book, people go, what the hell is this? You got to give it a label. And, I think that you can do a lot, as I've said. What was the second part of that question, though? Do you have 2 seconds? Because I thought of something else and now I can't remember.
Yeah. It took David a long time to read Maggie Brown because the stories affected me in a way that he needed to hold them and for a while before reading on.
I really appreciate that, and thank you for jogging my memory, because that was it. That I don't take that as a negative. I really take that as a positive. And Heather asked earlier about some of my story heroes, so I'll end on this note. Mavis Gallant, great Canadian writer who spent most of her career writing out of Paris, says in her preface to her collected stories, which is an essential book, she says, read a story and put this book down. you don't have to go on. They're worlds, you know. And so I think if you speed through a story collection, any story collection, and I appreciate Dave saying that about mine, but any story collection, the idea that you run through it is really not how story writers, in my view, see what we do.
All right. Well, I've got a link to Mavis Gallant right here, or right, whichever way you're looking. We have links to Peter's Twitter. Scroll back up in the chat if you'd like to. I tried to capture all of the names that Peter mentioned in this, and we'll update altaonline.com later today with this very interview if you missed any part of it. I am very grateful. Heather, thank you for doing this again. Peter, this was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank
folks,
you, Beth.
Don't forget to check out Peter's book. You can click on the link below to kind of familiarize yourself with that and consider buying it today. Please do check out Alta. Think about us too. We're cool. And finally, if you're available next Wednesday at 12:30, please do join us for poet Matthew Zapruder, who will be our next guest and is endorsed by Peter Orner.
Absolutely.
Again, everyone, thank you so much for joining us.
Matthew's new collection, Father's Day, is just devastating. Just wonderful.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's all you need. So come back here on a week from today at 12:30 and join us. Heather and Peter and everyone who joined us, thank you so much. Stay safe, guys, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Beth. Thanks, Heather.